Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. Today we have Stultifera Navis, the event teaser of Arknights, and I will be giving the animation a look-see today. You might notice a new light behind me. There, that hand. Ignore it. It's just going to be there from now on. I like it. It gives the place a good vibe, and I got it for free. No judgment. I'm on a budget. Anyway, let's get right into it, shall we? Let's go.
イベリア人はかつて海と大地を征服せんと勇んだ。
Oh my god, the water!
その広大な野望も
Holy
静寂の中でひっそりと
I
消えて
didn't
いく。
expect the water simulation to look that real.
黄金の時代は
Wow.
語る言葉を失い、
Alright. High expectations immediately,
大地
right
の
off the
創造
cuff.
もまた闇の潮流に飲まれ名目した。今ここにそれは再びまなじりを決するだろう。
Great handling of that light source there, too.
イベリアの名のもとに
Ooh, okay. Oh, that was cool. Oh, that's really cool. Alright, I'm into it. Oh! Don't mind me while I soy jack face all over this effects animation. Wow. Oh my god. Oh. This is gorgeous. This is beautiful, dude. Jesus Christ. Okay. Again, I have no clue what's going on as far as the plot goes, but I don't care. It looks gorgeous. Oh, there are things. There are things I want to talk about. Oh, we're not done yet. There's like a little, it's like a stinger here. I recognize that song. I must have reacted to it at some point. My brain is not that good with memory. So, whew. All right, we have things to talk about. So let's go over to the discussionary setup, shall we? Let's go. Breakdown time. Okay, so first things first. I know I've talked before about the Arknights animation. Their level of understanding in volumetrics with stuff like fog and like weather is really solid, and whoever is the effects team just nails that every time. When did they hire Weta Effects? For those who don't know, Weta Digital is one of the like leading effects companies in Hollywood. They did like Avatar: The Way of the Water, and amongst dozens, hundreds potentially of projects where they just go ham. They're like the guys who do water. You know, like, it is beautiful. Where do they get off? Like, obviously they didn't actually hire Weta. I'm just saying it's that good. It's that good. Look at this shit. All of this, like all of this foam, all of this volume, this weight, this power in the... Who rendered this? If anyone knows, I don't know if I'll be able to find it myself, but if any superfans watching this and they know who did the effects animation for this, please tell me, because I need to find them so I can shake their hand. I don't know who directed this, or who went that hard on the fucking water for an Arknights event teaser trailer. This must have been Unreal Engine 5 or something. There's no way it could have been anything less. That is way too detailed for anything. They must have done this in Unreal. That's the only way I can think that this water would have this level of fidelity, unless they did straight up have some in-house program designed similar to Weta Digital that allows them to handle water specifically to their own specification. That is insane. Of all the things I've seen made in stuff like Unreal, I don't think I've seen water quite that clean yet. I know that Unreal is an insane engine in general, and the live capabilities of it are nuts. They use it in The Mandalorian amongst a bunch of other stuff already for that exact reason. I don't know if they used it here, but that is insane volumetrics on water. There's no reason they had to do that. And here's actually something that I wanted to point out. While she's moving around this lantern down here, and I did earlier praise this use of lighting, because it is nice to have this like kind of cast on the bottom of the chin, and it like gets slightly darker as it goes up, and it has that general sense. But for some reason, as you go through here, there's this part here where she begins to raise this lantern, which ideally you would be assuming would be affecting the model, but it doesn't. And honestly, if I can be a little bit of a stickler here, I think they should have had it do so. I assume they just rendered it out on a different pass and just kind of added the light after the fact and left this sort of cell shading effect that is on all the clothing and of course on the bottom of the face, like I had mentioned, like all this. And there's the light source, but there's not actually seemingly a light emitter on that source in the program they're using. I don't know why they would do that other than maybe time, and they just decided to kind of add it in afterwards. But if there is an emitter, it must be super subtle, and the cell shading must be like hard baked into the models themselves. And for those who don't know what baking is, it's basically just leaving the model alone with its current attributes without having it affected by the rest of the scene and the effects going on, the lighting changes, stuff like that. Sometimes they do that just to save a little bit of effort with having to fight with different lighting sources. But in this situation, I think it would have been a lot more immersive had they introduced that. I don't know why they didn't. I assume it's because they were having issues with light sources. That seems to be a very universal thing with CG, is that if you can't get something to work, then just kind of fudge it and nobody will really care. But people like me notice, so... So here's something else that I don't know if other people would have noticed. So if you would be so kind as to watch right about there, right where the light from the lantern starts to affect the environment, I want to see if anyone noticed that as the lantern shows up, cracks are visible underneath the light and like on that glass. You can see this like weathering on here. You can, if you can't for some reason, there's like scar there, scar there, scar there, scar there. They have imperfections on the glass, which I wouldn't have expected them to do, and if they did, it would have been like an overlay, but they actually have them in the model, which is kind of neat. That is an extremely good way to pull a bunch of information and detail into one cohesive piece, instead of adding things layer and layer afterwards. Actually having them in the scene when it's rendered makes things feel just so much more unified, and it makes things feel weathered, aged, you know, it just adds some texture. That is one of the biggest things in CG. For those budding CG people watching this, add imperfections basically on everything. If you think it doesn't have something or it's missing something, the answer is textures. And if you don't have them on there, if you don't have imperfections, scrapes and such, add them, add a pass, add a texture on it. They will add so much character and flavor to everything that you make. If you're doing something that needs a little bit of detail, but you're not sure how much, if you're doing this in like a super cartoony thing, then it doesn't matter as much if you're using flat colors and such. But if you're doing something like this that has a more realistic edge to it, add textures. These surface impurities. They are extremely important for tying a scene together, and that'll be the exact secret sauce that makes your work stand out from any other thing on the internet. Those sorts of details. They're very underused in the amateur space, so if you do it, you will stand out significantly. So here's yet another one of those examples where they love to do this in Arknights animations. Hypergryph just really goes to town on these minor things, these little tiny micro movements and micro expressions. This isn't an expression, but this does weigh on the shot. Right here, as you're watching this character pull down this lever, her fingers don't just yoink the lever down. They move, and then you feel the fingers catch right here. They kind of just grab onto the edge as one would. You're forcing something down. Your fingers are what's gripping, not the whole hand, not the palm, not the edges back here on the pad of the fingers. The fingers themselves would be what grabs on and does the rest of the pull. A lot of people would just place the hand on and do a smooth motion, and you lose some of that flair in the weight of what is happening, that action there. So it is very nice that they decided to do that. They could have just had her hand stay roughly here, but they decided to take it just a little bit farther and have her fingers grab on. Super small, but it really, just like everything else they do with those details, makes a huge difference on how it feels to watch it. It adds just a little bit of weight. It makes you go, ooh, that's kind of a heavy, maybe an old rusted lever, not just like a free floating switch. It's not a light switch, it's a big heavy lever. And they show that just by this tiny little frame of the fingers grabbing instead of the whole hand moving down smoothly. One of the biggest highlights I have here is, of course, this mirror. This is super neat. So I assume, I'm going to have to guess the methodology they had here, but I'm going to assume that this was two different renders of the same shot using different lighting, and that they just placed together using some sort of a masking sequence. I don't know if it's because they took these segments here all around and colored those like green or something, or just left them transparent, and then put in the second pass under it, and then deformed it in some sort of a post-process. I'm not fully sure. So that's my take, is that they had two different passes and they just hand masked one of them together with the other and maybe deformed it a smidge to give it that glass shatter effect, especially stuff right here where you can see this like wibble wobble in the glass that wouldn't be in the clothing in the normal shot. Stuff like that. Very cool. So don't mind me as I removed myself from the camera so you can see the spot I'm going to be talking about, but especially spots right here where like this is actually this, but it's just moved over this way a little bit. Same with here and here. They're not technically the same, but they're not different either, so it makes me feel like there's some sort of a deformity going on underneath, if not an entire different layout of the background that they then just kind of edited slightly for each shot. Okay, so now I could go on about this little effects animation spot that they have here, but this is just the animation team flexing. Like, this water follows a lot of what I would describe as a Japanese style of water effect, especially stuff like Studio Ghibli and even more recent stuff like the works of Makoto Shinkai. This sort of bubbly water look, you can find a lot of this in like Ponyo, for example, but basically anything, especially Weathering with You by Makoto Shinkai, where the water has this sort of life to it, these highlights, this sort of just bubbliness. This one looks like a fried egg, don't mind me, but I really like the way that they did this. And there's a lot of ways to animate water, but I love that they took this specific style and then they underlaid it with this more dulled out kind of look to the rest of the water. These droplets are definitely the highlight here, just gorgeous. I also love that they do have the this, like, you see all these lines under here, this like underwater like texture, like that makes it look like it's under the water. This is like the sunlight pass going through water, and that's something that, again, they didn't have to do, but the effects team, I guess, is just cracked constantly with these projects. But they always put in these little details that really don't need to be there, but they just do, because they look better when they do it. So just do it, you know what? Spend that extra 10 minutes or whatever you have. It will be worth it. I'm not going to really draw over this sequence here, but I wanted to highlight how really cool it is to have this sort of like ribbon effect in this this sequence here. It doesn't last long. The way they whip around and have this sort of energetic beat to them, it adds a lot of weight and energy to something that is in reality broken down to just being a simple hit. These sorts of things are why I keep praising the effects teams for these animations. They really do put in that extra mile. Another little thing here that they didn't have to do that I didn't even realize until I was scrubbing through here, but this has a light trail. I didn't expect there to be a light trail coming out of here. I really didn't notice it the first time, but I'm sure I felt it. And that's why this felt so important when it started happening. Not only was the character centered and coming at me, but also the fact that there was an intensity in the light source in the center, which is just, again, great use of effects. And real quick while I'm here, this is something I don't know if I've ever actually talked about before on these animation breakdowns, but they do something here that is extraordinarily common. They shake the camera. So when this impact here happens, you see the impact, but then you also see the camera being shaken around as if it's actually there in physical space. This is something they do a lot in action films and action animation to really make a hit sell power. But it's kind of hard to tell which they actually used in sequences like this because there are so many ways to do so. My guess is that they probably ended up actually keyframing that shake. Whether or not they used some sort of a plug-in for that or they hand did it is completely up to them. But either way, great way to sell an impact. This part right here I wanted to talk about though, just because of the ferocity in this light here. When this blade comes through, those sparks, that particle simulation there, just fucking mwah. You can see exactly how it flares out in every direction, and where the hottest is hot, it's white, and just the lighting is so perfect on this. It's so realistic despite it being an animation. They really spent time on this to make these sparks look hot instead of just, oh, cartoon sparks, oh, they don't hurt. This shit hurts in a good way to watch it. Not a good way for the beast she's cutting up though. This is another great example shot of all these particle simulations they have here. The wind affecting everything as it comes down and you see all these different particles, even though they are blurred because of the motion blur of the camera. You see all this turbulence happening down here and all these sparks flying in different directions. Very realistic. Like, yeah, definitely gussied up for the sake of the video itself. They wouldn't actually move perfectly like this because it's still a simulation and they still work completely on math, and reality is not mathematical entirely. There are a lot of chaos factors with reality that we don't have to deal with as much in animation, but it's the matter that you have to try and simulate those to the best of your abilities. And doing something like having these turbulent spins, this energy being thrown around and causing these sparks to fly up at little curves like this. Like this one's just kind of doing its dance. This one's going out. This one's got like a weird like edge to it. That they're all going in different directions. I don't want to know how much time it took for this render to happen, because it probably took like nights, multiple days, unless they had some sort of a huge render farm to work with, which is possible. And I almost skipped right by this, but this is actually another really cool example of that camera hit. It's just, it doesn't shake this time, it actually goes back. The camera moves with the action. It moves away from the hit because it was so powerful. This type of choreography with the cameras and having them in close and fighting is something that is really useful. They do this a lot in Shang-Chi, amongst others. The fight choreography is brilliant and they do a lot of these camera tricks. Also, there's no reason for a bow to be this epic. This is such like an anime thing to have the power bow. I like that you can see it start to form right about here, where this knot in the hair starts to kind of take shape on the back of the head, and then it just happens. The rest of it just kind of forms around it, these couple of frames of it forming, and then it just boop right into existence in a full model. There's definitely this line here where somebody had to take the character's animation without that there and then switch it with the one that does, so it was probably just a match cut, but I've got to assume it's probably just boom, there's the bow from the prior of not having the bow right about here, and then the bow's there and they deformed it to kind of fit that transition a little bit tighter. Even down to the cloth simulation on these sails is pretty impressive. Is it groundbreaking like the water was earlier? No, but God, you can actually see the wind going through them. And somewhat realistically, if the cloth does feel heavy, which is exactly what sailcloth would be, that would be hundreds of pounds of fabric. So this is absolutely on point for how it would feel to have a lot of wind going through something so massful. People really underestimate how heavy cloth is on a sail. It is a lot of weight, and something like this would have this sort of fat rippling going on, and that's just, you can tell that the team really does their research and watches reference videos and utilizes them and takes them to heart to get the look that should be happening and not just what they think looks cool. I mean, yeah, of course there's a factor of that in there, but it's not their only thought. They're definitely putting that effort in to make it feel realistic, which is super, super respectable. This is kind of a neat shot because of the way that they use this transition and have the character kind of there and then boom, not there. But the mirror is here. So what I think they did actually, so they probably had this model here and this model here on the same stage, like present in the same project file, staring at each other, probably with the same animation to them, just shared between both models. And then when they zoomed into the one, it keeps the depth with this character, and then right as it passes through, they just fade transition to this shot as kind of a match cut, but a fade transition method of it to zoom in to this character. That's just kind of my thought of how they did it. I'm not entirely sure. They could have just straight up had this character here and then a separate render of the character. But what I think is going on here actually is that as this character pulls away from the one here in the foreground to this one here and becomes the foreground, the cracks on this mirror don't really move as you would expect with this model here. So what I gotta assume is that they're in the same world and that this character is actually behind the cracked mirror, or in some way, shape, or form behind that line of affected glass. I'm not fully confident, but that's what I would have done if I were the one handling it. And I may be wrong here, this is just kind of me going off of my minor experience with this. Is this a character from that other one I saw who was swimming under the water and like watching that like giant statue cry that I reacted to? Is this like the character before they grew like mermaid limbs? Like, I don't know. I could be completely off the mark there, but the face looks very similar. I don't remember the scar being there, but I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've watched it, obviously. But given the way that this weight feels on this animation, and then that song, I think, is the one that's playing during that. Again, I'm not like going back to double check any of this theorizing here. Am I right? Just let me know in the comments, and that'll be it for me on this piece. Thank you all so very much for watching. That was all I had to say and all the parts I wanted to break down and talk about. There was a few less in this one than the other ones have had, but that doesn't mean it was devoid of anything to talk about. There was always plenty to actually discuss and get into. As per usual, there's always something to talk about. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you look forward to the next ones, and I will see you then. Goodbye!